Welcome to a very special edition of Autism Unpacked. In this compilation edition, featuring highlights from across Series 1, we are privileged to be able to listen to the voices of those with lived experience of autism, reflections on the impact it has had on them and their families, as well as uplifting insight and advice. There really is something in it for everyone. We'll hear from TV personality and professional dancer Tom Malone Jr., who was diagnosed in his 20s. From Karen Broomhead, a lecturer in special educational needs and a mum of 2, including a wonderful little girl who has complex autism. And from 2 incredible people who support autistic pupils in preparing for their future life beyond school, Kelly Guthrie and Ollie Masters. And of course, you'll be hearing from me, your host, Rosie Gill-Moss, a mum of 1 neurotypical and 2 neurodiverse children, and someone who received my own diagnosis later in life. We've got laughter, light bulb moments, and stories that'll make you feel all the emotions. So get cosy, grab your favourite snack or pop those earbuds in for a walk, and get ready for a celebration of neurodiversity, humanity, and everything that makes the autistic experience beautifully unique. Growing up without a diagnosis can place an additional importance on how other family members treat you. Tom Malone Jr. explains more.
It was one of those things where it almost felt like everything that everyone else found really easy, I just couldn't do. And I couldn't work out why they were so good at it and I wasn't, until I realised, obviously, with my diagnosis later on, that my brain isn't programmed to understand those things. And I remember being a kid, I remember actually having the thought of, what if I'm the only person in the world and everyone else is like a robot? And I remember, turns out it's more likely the other way around because I'm more logical than most people, but I remember thinking, like, what if I'm the only person that's this way and everyone else is something else? And I remember thinking that all the time when I was a kid, and like looking at other people, trying to work out how they react to things and if I would react the same way or if I should react the same way. And yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opening experience when I got my diagnosis, because like you said, it's a level of acceptance of, oh, I am different. And
this is why.
Yeah. And it's an understanding of it, and then understanding that, oh, it's okay that I struggle with those things. Because like, if you actually look at how my brain's programmed, I'm doing better than you might have thought. I'm doing better to cope with it than most people would. So,
and it's things like when you're a child, so many of the autistic traits and behaviours, you can get labelled as naughty, fussy, rude. How many times were you told to make eye contact, to hug people? All these kind of micro traumas that are being done to us, but not deliberately. There's no intent there. And I'm just wondering what your parents did, because I know you're close to your family, because they must have known that you found the world a little bit difficult. And how were they able to assist you? Because they wouldn't have known either. I mean, my parents hadn't got a clue either, and they actually feel quite guilty about it, which they shouldn't. But I'm just wondering if they helped you out anyway.
Yeah, massively. And my grandparents as well. Because I used to have a thing about onions and stuff in my food. My grandma used to grate onions into food for me so that they would dissolve in the food and stuff. My mum and dad. One thing that I'm always thankful for my mum and dad for is I had the same consequences for my actions as my brothers and sisters. Even though they knew I was a bit different, I never got any kind of leeway for stuff. And it wasn't that they didn't acknowledge that certain things might have been harder. It was more that when I become an adult in the real world, other people won't wait for me to disclose a diagnosis before they treat me accordingly.
Yeah.
So it was more that they were just preparing me for the fact that the world is like that.
The part that role models play in autistic people's lives shouldn't be underestimated. Let's hear about that and about the impact that social media can have too.
When I was young, there wasn't these people on social media that were autistic, and there wasn't that representation. And more so, even less, there was representation of people that weren't stereotypically autistic. There was Rain Man.
The Big Bang Theory, basically, was how autistic people were represented.
Big Bang Theory, Rain Man, this is how people thought every autistic person was. So I kind of saw it as more so, I have an opportunity to show people that, I'm a normal person. I do this dance stuff that you all think is cool. I used to box. I do a bunch of stuff that people would consider cool. But I also have really awkward moments. I'm also a bit of a nerd when it comes to reading books that have dragons and elves in and stuff like that. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and be like, be autistic, you can be amazing like at these things and stuff. Like there's also downsides to it as well. And I think being able to be honest about it from a real person's perspective on social media is something that we didn't have back then that is needed. So I kind of see it as a responsibility that I could be that for a next generation of boys that might not relate to the Big Bang Theory and Rain Man, but they might see me and go, I kind of see like where he's coming from and what he struggles with. I like the same things as him, and I kind of fit the same sort of demographic.
I really like seeing at the moment is there's a lot more talk about successful people who are neurodivergent. And it's one of the things that I've seen in my kids. They love to be able to aspire to somebody else who's got the same condition as them. I mean, my son did do a project on Elon Musk, which is a questionable role model, but he was fascinated. Teslas were his special interest at the time. So he was then able to knuckle down and do a presentation on something that he was interested in. I feel a similar way because I feel that by talking openly about my diagnosis, because you get that you don't look autistic. And it's such, people think they're being nice when they say that to you, but it's such a derogatory thing to both myself and to the rest of the autistic community as well, because what does autistic look like? We don't, well, sometimes we wear a lanyard actually. That's something I always feel we're a bit branded when we have to wear a lanyard. It's like, I don't want to have to wear my brand.
No, it's definitely a bit of a strange one. Like, you're expecting me to behave a certain way based on your stigmas and not who I am as a person. And that it ends up being, you're almost saying that you expect to see the autism first before you see me as a person. It's a little bit dehumanizing. And I think that's what I struggle with. And it's part of why I do what I do so much on social media, is because I want people to see me as a person first. And I happen to be autistic. Like, I can do all these things and that's great. Oh, and I happen to be autistic. Like, I don't need to look at me and go, autistic, and this is the person behind it. Yeah, because it's not, it doesn't define who you are. It impacts on a huge amount of who you are, but we're still individual. 100%. I say to people all the time, like, it doesn't define who I am, but it's a massive part of who I am. Like, everything, like, it's massively shaped who I am, basically. Like, I process things in a way because my brain is autistic. And I can't separate myself from that. But I'm also a person first.
No one knows their children better than the parents. We're going to hear now from Mum Karen, who believes her little girl is who she's meant to be.
To just really, to try and get across who Lois is, I would say she is unapologetically herself. So there is no masking with Lois. Like, if she was here now, she would be causing chaos. She is just this wonderfully carefree child who is so comfortable being herself. This is Lois's world and we're all just living in it, honestly. She is such a character, and I am so proud of who she is. And I don't share our story for pity or for sympathy or what a life you must lead. She is who she's meant to be, and actually is such a capable human being who can contribute to things in life. So, but she is a real character.
She sounds awesome. And it's really lovely. I like to hear anybody talk that lovingly about their child. But I think so many listeners and people out there who don't have a child with high demand needs will be thinking, God, it sounds really hard and, life must be very tough. And to hear you speaking about your relationship with Lois so positively, I think is really powerful.
I think so as well. And also it's okay that if you don't always feel like that. So, in terms of if there are parents starting off on this journey, I'd really like to get across that your child is so capable, is going to be so capable of great things, but it's okay to say this is also really hard. Like, you can absolutely champion your child, but also acknowledge those struggles, because this is daily life. It is hard. If I haven't slept all night because she's been up 5 or 6 times, it can be hard. It's really hard when, she is so upset because we can't understand what she's asking for, you know, those kinds of things. Yes, it is hard, but there is nothing better than being her mum, and obviously in Rory's mum as well. It really is going to be okay. You know, if you are starting off on this journey, it really is going to be a wonderfully challenging journey that you will just see your child, you know, progress, and there isn't anything more wonderful.
What prompts people to get a diagnosis can differ between individuals. Tom Malone Jr. came to it from an interesting and emotional route, as we can hear. So Tom, what was it then that prompted you to go about getting a diagnosis for yourself?
So I'd got to an age where people would always make comments and mention being autistic and stuff. And my mum actually did take me to the doctors when I was a kid, and they just said that I was ignorant because they tested my hearing, I guess, and my hearing was fine. So they thought I just wasn't listening to people because I was ignorant. So yeah, I was diagnosed as ignorant instead.
Nice.
And then as an adult, it never really, to me, I always had this kind of idea of, I've got this far, I'll be okay. A label won't really change anything, how wrong I was. But yeah, that was my mindset kind of. And then my nephew got diagnosed. One of them, then another. And the second one, he was actually living with my mum and dad at the time. And when his school suspected him of having autism, it was all the same little things that I used to do when I was little. And at that point, I thought I should get tested. So I got my my assessment, and it was more from a place of, if I am, it might not necessarily change the rest of my life that much, but I can then be a person he can relate to, especially because I've grown up not being your stereotypical sort of autistic person that they like to put in a box. So I've done all these things that you wouldn't necessarily equate to someone with autism or someone that's autistic. So for me, it was a case of, if you can look at me and see that you can achieve things outside of that box and you don't have to stick in the box that people put you in, and also you've got an older family member that you can go to when you're feeling a type of way that might understand where you're coming from, then I kind of owe it to him to get my diagnosis too and
making me a bit
be
emotional,
that person.
Tom. That's really sweet. A diagnosis can help the whole family, but can also bring with it a myriad of emotions. Let's listen to a conversation which deals with the impact it can have. So you said you feel that the diagnosis is sort of giving you that almost that knowledge and that clarity about who you were as a child. And I was much like you. Why would you label, you know? And I read in a book that a label is a care instruction. So, you know, it tells you how a child needs to be supported and cared for. And I think when you reframe it like that, you think, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try and understand? How did your family react when you got diagnosis? Were they like, yeah, we know?
Yeah, my mum laughed down the phone at me. I was like, when I got the official confirmation, I got quite emotional because I was like looking back at stuff or whatever, and I rang my mum and she just laughed and was like, yeah, of course you are. Yeah. She was like, we've been telling you this for so long. This is just official. And I think it was important in terms of like grounding, in terms of they just treated me the same as they always had. So it didn't really affect my family too much in that sense. Obviously they're more aware of stuff, but in terms of how they interacted with me, it was exactly the same. I'm still the same person that I've always been. I just know why I'm certain ways.
I think it almost helped my parents to a certain extent because they were really great parents. I had no deprivation, no trauma. I was, you know, a very happy child. And then the wheels sort of fell off. And I think nobody's ever really been able to understand why. And I was labelled with depression and put on antidepressants and all these sort of things that women as well, I mean, particularly it's not recognised. And it was, I almost went through a period of grief when I got my diagnosis. And that's a big word but I do mean grief because I think I grieved all those missed opportunities, all those times that I had behaved really, really recklessly or impulsively because I was seeking that dopamine, that affirmation. And all the times that I'd been really, really unkind to myself. My mantra in my head, I won't say the word, but it's something Rosie, you know, God's sake, Rosie. And that is a mantra that had been in my head all my life. and why am I like this? Why am I like this? And now I'm able to take a little bit of a step back and say, you're like this because you've got 2 neurological conditions that make life a bit harder.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break. And do you think that you've been able to apply that to yourself as well, that bit of extra kindness?
Yeah, definitely kindness. I definitely went through a bit of a roller coaster of phases after my diagnosis. I went for a long point where I was kind of like, oh, I'm like this because I'm autistic. So how do I separate my personality from autism?
Yeah.
And then I went through a phase where I kind of accepted that, oh no, I am that way because I'm autistic and I can't separate them. That's just the way I process information, which like my whole personality is shaped because I'm autistic. And then I went through a phase of, okay, well then how do I separate my personality from my mask and how I mask?
About the mask,
yeah. And at that point, I came to the conclusion after that and the acceptance of everyone is shaped by our interactions with other people and how we learn and what we take from other people and like our experiences. And as much as I'm not solely the mask of when I'm masking or whatever, as I chip away at that, I find that it's how I've learned to deal with situations, and that's okay as well. That's my kind of safety blanket almost.
How parents feel when their child is diagnosed as autistic can be a challenge, but not always for the reasons you might think. Here's Mum Karen again.
I do say we were lucky in this respect, that we were able to identify certainly traits or different behaviours, I suppose. You know, like you've said, Lois was my first child, but I think it was just so evident. You know, the speech delay as well was very clear. We weren't making any progress with kind of personal care, you know, and so that resulted in a very quick diagnosis, to be honest. We received a verbal diagnosis at 2.5, you know, where that first meeting with the paediatrician, and he said, absolutely, you know, autism with significant speech and language delay. And then he said, let's just, you know, leave it a few months before we absolutely put it down on paper. And then, just as she turned 3, it was like a rubber stamp, that written diagnosis of autism and significant speech delay.
And how did you feel as parents when you firstly got the verbal confirmation and then that paperwork? Yeah,
so I think I'll be honest, and it's okay to be honest, because this, you know, this is taking you on a different path. My initial reaction was it felt like a punch in the stomach. It really felt like, oh my goodness, someone has just said Lois is autistic. And although I knew, of course I knew, it really was challenging to hear. But I really want to be clear. I wasn't upset that she's autistic. I've never been upset that she is autistic. I was upset at the thought that she was going to have a battle just to be understood, that she would probably have to fight a lot harder to succeed in a world that isn't designed for her. And so that was really why I felt the way that I did. You know, those early years were so, so hard when you are still in that state of comparing your child to other children. You know, what is it? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
But when you're in those trenches of, oh my goodness, this life for my child is likely to be very different. And although, you know, of course that's okay, but it's because, you know, society isn't designed for neurodivergent children. And that was really where it was so hard to take, that I thought we are going to have a lifetime of her battling just to be understood for the wonderful child that she is. But there was also relief. So huge relief. And, you know, to receive a diagnosis so early really was beneficial to Lois and has been so beneficial for, you know, where she is now. And I know that that's not the case for so many parents. So it was a huge relief. It meant that we received the diagnosis and she was essentially at nursery by the age of 2.5 with a full-time one-to-one to keep her safe and other children safe. And again, we haven't had to fight for an EHCP. We've had to fight for a meaningful EHCP. Wow. That's a completely different story. But the actual process was very straightforward. And, you know, I think that was partly because of the complexity of her needs. And also this was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So pressures have changed considerably since then.
Having some relatable context can be incredibly helpful when it comes to preparing our children for the future. Here's an anecdote from our experts about supporting individuals on their unique path through life. And I'm thinking of the parents now, if your child receives a diagnosis of autism, and particularly perhaps if it was a complex autism. So you're aware that your child is probably not going to follow the traditional academic and career path. How would you perhaps explain to the parents, maybe Ollie, do you want to take this one? And how would you explain to them what options might be available to their young person?
I think it's interesting because I had a conversation with one of our head teachers a couple of weeks ago about how people feel about getting a diagnosis and then what support needs to be put in place for their future. And he was saying, I don't really understand how parents might feel in this scenario. So we created essentially a story about it. And I said, well, imagine you going on holiday. Where would you go on holiday out of interest, Rosie? Where would you pick anywhere in the world?
Oh, Thailand. There we go.
Fantastic. Nice. So what sort of things might you take with you to go to Thailand?
Oh gosh, I'm not prepared for these. I would take some sun cream,
nice,
some bikinis, some books. Am I taking my children? We'll pretend not in this situation.
Yeah, just yourself.
So lots of books.
Yeah.
Some clothes, that sort of thing.
Nice. And you're prepared for the weather that you're going to actually experience in Thailand.
Yes.
Okay, so imagine you get on the plane and you end up in sort of northern Scandinavia and it's snowing everywhere and all the rest of it. Does that make visiting that place a bad thing?
Oh, it's just because I wasn't prepared.
All that's really going to be required, thinking about it, is going to be a change of outfits and maybe a quick Google search to try and work out what attractions are in your local area. It's a different approach and a different holiday, but that doesn't make it any less fulfilling. And I think a lot of parents are going into it thinking that they've maybe failed or that they're not particularly achieving anything because the destination isn't what they'd prepared for. Mm-hmm. Where I think what we do as careers professionals is actually support both the young person and then their families in order to have the right clothes, to have the right sort of attractions nearby that they might go and visit. We're giving out them access to those tools.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting and really rewarding part of this job.
It's time to look to the future. So next up, we're discussing how vital it is that from an early age, all children are encouraged to think big. And as you'll discover, nothing is off the table. We know, don't we, that neurodivergent people are capable of changing the world if they're given the right opportunities. I like to use the expression the right runway to fly from, because not everybody fits into this kind of very cookie-cutter mould. Kelly, what ages do you work, what of children do you work with or young people?
So our schools do start very, very young. We do have sort of primary age young people. For our work particularly, we start as soon as they reach secondary school. So what would be your year 7 young people? Because this is the stage where that imagination is going. And sometimes, and I found from my experience, you're quite limited in understanding the future around the people that you know, the people that are in your smaller unit. And there is no better time to get these young people to dream big, to get them to really think about the world out there and what they're passionate about and what they're interested in, and really help them to understand who they are and what they could be. And we never ever want to kind of leave that to the later years. I know typically within mainstream schools, it's kind of year 10, year 11 that we're starting to have these conversations where every young person, no matter which setting background they come from, would really benefit from learning how to dream every dream at a very, very young age and really sort of reach to aspire what they want to be in life.
And Ollie, what sort of careers are the young people going into? What have you got any sort of really unusual examples of?
Oh, that's a good question. I love just the stories that all of our young people share about what they want to do and how they want to do things. I think my favourite young person is current, that I was working with last year, I think it was going into working in a chocolate design role in Cadbury's. So he was planning to move to Birmingham to go designing chocolates for Cadbury at Cadbury World, essentially. And so we were supporting him in getting into working as a chocolatier and creating all of these interesting designs and all the rest of it.
That's
Nothing's
amazing.
off the table.
It's fantastic.
It's that, and that's the great thing that I said 100 times that I wish I knew what was out there when I was younger. We've had students that will say, I've got one young lady who wants to make saddles for horses, and she wants to create the designs on saddles for horses, and that's what she's doing. I've got a young lady who's interested in taxidermy. That's what she's doing, and nothing is ever off the table. Like, nothing is ever too crazy or too out there that we can't find a way to make them explore their passions and their dreams.
Amazing. Having a passion for something can bring huge benefits, including helping neurodiverse people to communicate, focus on what they want to do in life, and even improve social skills. Here's Tom to tell us why.
I know that dance has had an amazing impact on your life. You get to travel
huge.
around the world dancing, don't you? What sort of dance do you do now?
So I've trained in pretty much everything. Tap, ballet, contemporary, locking, popping, breaking, house.
What's your favourite?
Everything. It's a toss-up between like choreography, like stylized choreography, and breaking, definitely, for two different reasons. I feel like breaking really ignites like the competitive spirit that I have.
This is what the old people would call breakdancing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So breaking really ignites that competitive spirit because it's like a question and answer, like battle situation.
Yes.
So I love that. But then I think the reason I've always loved the choreography side of things is it's a lot more. When I was growing up, if I struggled to convey an emotion because I wasn't the best at communicating that kind of stuff, I could always let that out through that side of dance. And that was my way of like almost venting that those emotions that I would struggle to communicate.
Yeah, I write. I used to write my mum notes and things like that, and it's something I do with my kids now as well. Because sometimes if you do struggle with communication, it's finding another way to let people know, and that is a lot of the, I suppose, the sort of hidden side of autism is a lot of what we're processing will go on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So, you can look very calm and serene, but I was thinking of like the swan that's paddling furiously under the water. Would you say then that your neurodiversity has perhaps helped you in your career because of that kind of immense hyper-focus and special interest that you will have had around dance?
Yeah, 100%. In multiple different ways as well, not just within like one side of the career, which is the creative side and the traveling, competing, performing. Of course, when you're honing your skills, being able to hyper-focus on something that you're passionate about is like a bit of a superpower in a way. Like that was amazing for me, but as well outside of that, in terms of the social currency it gave me, like when I was at school, like even prior to when my career was like going from strength to strength, when I was at school, like having that social currency of knowing that, I might be a bit awkward in these situations, I might not understand these social cues, I might struggle when I can't do something in my particular way that I'm comfortable with, but I never felt any sort of lesser within my self-worth because I knew that in the thing that I'm passionate about, I excel at, and I know that I'm really good at something that I care about, like more than anything in the world. And no matter what you can say about how I might be awkward, this thing that I care the most about, I'm good at. So it's never going to depreciate my value in my mind because I'm good at the thing I care about. And I think that was something that as a life skill is probably the biggest thing that dancers gave me aside from everything else. Like,
and as you're speaking, I'm thinking it's probably one of the biggest gifts your parents gave you, because I'm going to say allow, but that's probably not the right word, but to encourage a boy to go into dance is still something that not all parents would actively encourage, and particularly not 20 odd years ago.
Yep.
but to allow you to explore your craft and your hyper-focus, they've enabled you to form a career out of it.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a message there for parents who are listening whose children might be into something and you're thinking, well, that's not going to make you a career, is it?
Yeah.
And you never know. I was talking off camera earlier about a friend of a friend whose son sells Lego. You know, that was his special interest. He buys it secondhand, sells, and he's making an absolute fortune. So it's fun. It's all about finding, and because that word's superpower sometimes it can feel a bit offensive, can't it, when you're in full burnout, lying staring at a wall. Where's my superpower?
There's definitely a time and place for
it. But in situations like that, to be as good as you are in any field, you have to be dedicated and you have to love it.
When thinking about your children's future, it's important not to let fear consume you. There are bound to be questions and fears, but it's never too early to evaluate aspirations and work towards what long-term support might look like. Here's Karen again. What are your hopes for Lois? What do you see in her future?
I think the future, or to talk about the future when you have an autistic child with high support needs, is absolutely terrifying. It can consume you if you let it. Really, what happens after the EHCP that you fought for, for so long, 19, 25, what happens then? What happens in her future? Will she live an independent life? Will she get married? Will she have children? And really that absolutely terrifying question of what happens when I'm not here, and having to think about wills and trusts and deputyship and how she would manage without me and my husband. What I quickly realised was my hopes and dreams aren't necessarily Lois's hopes and dreams. So actually, I hoped, as perhaps many parents would, I anticipated that she would get married, that she would have children, that eventually she would fly the nest. But actually, are they really Lois's hopes? Actually, I think Lois probably wants to be happy and safe, potentially with Pepper, in however many years, I don't know. So I think I've definitely reevaluated my kind of hopes for Lois. So I believe she will be able to live a semi-independent life, hopefully doing activities that she enjoys. And I can do that. I can support her to do that. So I think if there can be a tendency to potentially get kind of bogged down in the future, and those feelings are absolutely valid. So definitely, we have to acknowledge that those are things that we will think about. But I think if you let them consume the present, that's not great. And I know it's easier said than done. But, if I'm feeling particularly worried about the future, my husband will always say, but remember when she was diagnosed and you couldn't envisage who she would be in 7 years' time. And now look at the amazing child she is. I think it's really important that, I don't know how she will be in 7 years' time or 17 years or 70 years. But I know that I can help her prepare for her future now, whatever that looks like.
And that's a wrap on our first compilation celebration. I hope you gained as much revisiting these unforgettable moments as we did putting them together for you. Whether you laughed, learned, or just benefited from the emotions on display, thank you for being part of this amazing journey with us. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on our socials.